I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again. I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again. He gets sweeter and sweeter as the days go by. Oh, what a love between my Lord and I. I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again. I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again. I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again. He gets sweeter and sweeter as the days go by. Oh, what a love between my Lord and I. I keep falling in love with him over and over and over and over again.
Good evening. You know, by the time that you arrive at John chapter 11, you've already had a number of stories, a number of accounts that have helped you to get to know Jesus even better. And as you have gotten to know him even better, no doubt, you have fallen in love with him even more. And so, just like there have been many stories up till now, John chapter 11 contains one of my all-time favorite stories as far as really getting to know the heart of Jesus. And so let's just share this story together as we read along here in John chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. And when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. So much like what we saw in John chapter 9 with the man that had been born blind, this event is taking place in such a way as God's glory is going to be able to be exhibited in a very unmistakable way. And so it says in verse 5, Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. And so when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, Let us go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you're going back? And so again, they're concerned for his welfare, they're concerned for his safety, and there had been the attempt to stone Jesus after one of those confrontations that he had with the religious leaders. But then Jesus answers, Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It's only when people walk at night that they stumble, for they have no light. And this kind of harkens back to his declaration that he was the light of the world. And so after he said this, he went on to tell them, Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. And then his disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. Now, Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. And we just continue to see this over and over where Jesus makes a statement And the disciples only hear it from a very literal standpoint. They only hear it from a very natural point of view. They only hear it with earthly ears, and they miss the true meaning. And so then Jesus told them plainly, verse 14, Lazarus is dead, and it is for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But now let us go to them. Then notice closely verse 16. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, Let us also go, that we may die with him. Now, this is that Thomas that we've pointed out on other occasions kind of gets a bad rap, because later on he's going to be the one that says, I won't believe until I can see him with my own eyes, until I can touch him with my own hands. And so he's got that designation of being that doubting Thomas. But there is no doubt in Thomas here. While the other disciples are concerned about Jesus going there and his safety, once Jesus makes it very clear he's going, Thomas is the first one to speak up and say, let's just go with him, and we will die there with him. But on his arrival now, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. This is after the funeral, this is after the burial, and 4 days has already transpired. But now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and to Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. And when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him. But Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. And Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha answered, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at that last day. But Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. And so we have yet another I am statement, much like he had said in John chapter 6 and verse 35 when he claimed to be the very bread of life. I am the bread of life. Like he did in John chapter 8 and verse 12, like we pointed out just a few moments ago, where he claimed to be the light of the world. I am the light of the world. Like he did in John chapter 8 and verse 58 when he said, before Abraham was, I am. Like he did in John chapter 10, the passage we looked at last Lord's Day in verse 9, where he said, I am the gate, I am the door to the sheep. Or like he did in John chapter 10 and verse 11, I am the good shepherd. And now he again is making an I am statement. I am the resurrection. Yeah, he's going to rise again in the resurrection, but you need to understand, Martha, I am the resurrection and the life. And anyone, he goes on to say, who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? Yes, Lord, she told him. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. Now, folks, that's a powerful confession. It's the same confession that Andrew made back in Mark chapter 1 and verse 41 when Andrew said, you are the Messiah. You're the one we've been looking for. You're the one we've been waiting for. It's the same confession that Nathanael made in John chapter 1 and verse 49. You are the Son of God. It's the same confession that Peter makes in Mark chapter 16 and verse 16. You are the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. And so Martha proclaims that in her confession. And after she has said this, she went back and she calls her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and he's asking for you." So when Mary heard this, she got up quickly and she went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered into the village, but was still at the very place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she had gotten up and went out, they followed after her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." The very same observation that her sister Martha had just recently made. If you had just been here, our brother would not have died. Verse 33 says, "When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled." And so there again we get a very intimate insight, a glimpse into the heart of Jesus. He is moved with compassion. We mentioned that last Lord's Day in our sermon time, of the compassion that motivated Jesus, his love and his compassion, his caring. And so he's moved very deeply and he's troubled. And he asks the question in verse 34, "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. And then verse 35 has that simple observation: Jesus wept. We've pointed out through this study that the human aspect of Jesus is very visible in John's account, where he tells us when Jesus grows tired, he tells us when Jesus grows angry, he tells us when Jesus is hungry, he tells us when Jesus is thirsty, he tells us when Jesus is moved with compassion, when Jesus is troubled, and now he is simply using that observation on this occasion. Jesus wept when he saw the weeping and the mourning and the pain of Mary and Martha and these friends who had gathered together to mourn with them. And then the Jews even observed that. "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" And so they have a similar response that the sisters had. If you had only been here, you could have prevented this. They're not privy to what Jesus had already told his disciples. There was a purpose in this, and the purpose was what was about to happen, another opportunity for Jesus to demonstrate the works of God that he had been sent to do to prove who he was. And so verse 38, Jesus once more, deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days." Now, I don't want to go too deeply into the description of what would happen to a corpse after 4 days. I'll just allow your imagination to capture what Martha's concern was in prying open this sealed tomb where the body had been laying, and she was concerned about that. But then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" Now, folks, I want you to mark very closely, either physically if you don't have an aversion to writing in your Bible, or at least mentally, verse 40, because that again recaptures the purpose of all of this taking place and transpiring the way that it did. When Jesus got word that Lazarus was sick, he's only a very short distance away. He could have gotten there very quickly, but he delayed for 2 days. And in that delaying time, Lazarus dies. 4 days transpire before he actually arrives there, as far as the amount of time the body has laid in the tomb. And the purpose was so that they would see the glory of God. Just keep that in mind. And so they took away the stone. And then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you have sent me. And so a little insight again into the prayer life of Jesus, who on just a number of occasions would have those times of solitude in praying to his Father, and the absolute assurance that God heard his prayer and would answer his prayer. And so he says, I didn't say this for my purposes or even for your purposes, God. I said this for the benefit of those who are standing here, in order that they may know that you have sent me. And when he said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. And the dead man came out, his hands and his feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. And Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. Well, you can imagine this scene of these mourners who are just heartbroken over the death of Lazarus, who is one of those guys I would love to be able to sit down and visit with, and we'll see more of that even after chapter 12. But one of those guys that evidently had the kind of personality that his sisters loved him deeply, and Jesus was attracted to him as a friend and had a deep love for him as well. And so after this man had died, there is that grieving time, there is that mourning time, there's that profound loss of someone that was so significant to them. And yet now Jesus, at his command, Lazarus come forth, Lazarus come out. This one who was once dead is alive again. And so many put their faith in him. But look at verse 46. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. And then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is like the Supreme Court of the Jewish leadership. They are the final say in matters of law and interpretation of the law. So they call a meeting, a special meeting of the Sanhedrin. What are we accomplishing, they ask. Here is this man performing many signs. And if we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. And then the Romans will come, and they will take away our temple and our nation. But then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, spoke up, you know nothing at all. You do not realize that it is better for you that one man die for the people than that the whole nation perish. And what's interesting is what's noted in verse 51. He did not say this on his own, but as high priest that particular year, he prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, and not only for that nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and make them one. So now verse 53 makes an interesting observation. So from that day on, they plotted to take his life. Now keep in mind, there have been some spontaneous attempts already to kill Jesus, but it's from this point on that there is actually a plot, a scheming, a planning, a discussion of exactly how to bring about the demise of this one Jesus of Nazareth. Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly among the Jews. Instead, he withdrew to a region near the wilderness, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. And when it was almost time now for the Jewish Passover, one of those annual festivals that we spoke of last Lord's Day, many went up from the country to Jerusalem for their ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. And verse 56 says that they kept on looking for Jesus. And as they stood in the temple courts, they asked one another, "What do you think? Isn't he coming to the festival at all?" But the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that anyone who found out where Jesus was should report it so that they might be able to arrest him. In this study of the life of Jesus, in John's account, things are building now to the huge crescendo of, we're just a couple of chapters away from his arrest, from his mock trial, from his horrible scourging, beating, from his crucifixion, his execution, from his burial, and even from then his triumphant rising up from the grave. But as we conclude chapter 11, I just want to reiterate the purpose of this event was to display the power of God, to display the glory of God in such an undeniable fashion. And with that in mind, I want to conclude by just reading one of the Psalms, a small section of Psalms 63, penned by David when he was in the desert of Judah. Listen to the words of this beautiful psalm. "You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water. I have seen you in the sanctuary, and behold your power and your glory, because your love is better than life. My lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live, and in your name I will lift up my hands. I will be fully satisfied as with the richest of foods. With singing lips my mouth will praise you. On my bed I remember you. I think of you through the watches of the night. Because you are my help, I sing in the shadow of your wings. I cling to you. Your right hand upholds me." David captured the glory of God. Jesus was displaying that very glory. Keep up your study and keep falling in love with Him.